In my line of work, you learn one immutable truth. Nothing collapses all at once. If a skyscraper falls or a bridge snaps, it wasn't the wind that did it. Not really. It was a hairline fracture in the concrete 3 years prior. It was a pocket of air in a weld. It was a contractor who decided that 4 rebars were good enough, when the blueprint called for 6. Water gets into those tiny invisible spaces. It freezes, it expands, and it retreats. It does this 1,000 times until the iron rusts and the stone turns to sand. By the time the roof caves in, the destruction has been a work of art years in the making. My name is Elias Thorne. In the town of Oak Haven, I'm the man you call when the porch is sagging or the drywall is sweating. I'm a general contractor, a carpenter, and a mason. I smell of sawdust, diesel, and motor oil. People look at my calloused knuckles and the dirt under my fingernails and they see a simple man. They think my brain works at the same slow rhythmic pace as my hammer. They see a man who measures twice and cuts once, and they assume that's the extent of my depth. They're wrong. To build something that lasts in this world, you need a mastery of physics, a command of logistics, and above all, an infinite supply of patience. You have to understand how pressure distributes. You have to know where the load-bearing walls are. And most importantly, you have to know how to spot rot before it reaches the core. Sarah was my masterpiece. Or so I thought. We'd been married for 12 years. I built our house with my own 2 hands. From the moment the backhoe broke the stubborn Georgia red clay to the second I polished the mahogany banister. I knew every copper pipe in those walls. I knew how the house breathed in the humid summers and how it groaned in the winter. And I knew exactly when the rot of a lie began to fester in the guest room. It started on a Tuesday in October. 2:14 a.m. I woke up to a vibration. Not a sound, but a rhythmic, tectonic shudder on the nightstand. Sarah was sleeping with her back to me, her breathing a bit too steady, a bit too performative. People who are truly asleep don't hold their breath for 3 seconds every time they shift. On the nightstand sat her old iPad, the one she used for looking up recipes or scrolling through Pinterest. The screen flickered to life in the dark, casting a cold, blue glow against the ceiling I'd painted eggshell white. "Are you asleep yet? I can still smell you on my sheets. I want more." The message came from a contact labeled simply as JV. I didn't feel the white-hot rage I expected. I didn't want to scream or throw the furniture I'd handcrafted through the windows I'd installed. Instead, I felt a cold, technical disappointment. It was the feeling I get when I find termite damage in a beautiful oak beam. The structure is compromised. The material is dishonest. Now, I had to assess the extent of the damage. I moved with the silence of a man who knows where every squeaky floorboard is. I stepped on the outer edge of the frame, near the baseboard, bypassing the noise. I took the iPad into the kitchen. I sat at the breakfast nook I'd built for her 31st birthday. The moonlight hit the granite countertops, making them look like cold tombstones. I opened the message history. It was an archive of betrayal. Photos, videos, plans. JV was Julian Vane. In Oak Haven, Julian Vane was a local deity. He was the crown prince of Vane development, a man who wore $3,000 Italian suits to muddy construction sites and drove a silver Porsche that cost more than my first 3 houses combined. He was currently developing The Heights, a luxury condo project on the North Ridge that was supposed to modernize our town. He looked at men like me as if we were part of the landscape, like a tree or a boulder that needed to be cleared to make room for his vision. I scrolled through their messages. It wasn't just the sex that stung, it was the mockery. Is the grease monkey still covered in sawdust? Julian had written 2 weeks ago. Tell him to work a double shift. I've got a bottle of Krug and a bed that's too big for one person. Sarah's reply, he's so dull, Jules. Sometimes I think his brain is made of plywood. He doesn't even notice when I'm gone. He just stares at his blueprints and talks about structural integrity. He's a bore. I need someone who actually lives in the real world, not someone who's constantly buried in a toolbox. I looked out the kitchen window at my old Ford F-150. It was rugged, scarred, and reliable. In my garage, my tools were organized with surgical precision. Chisels, levels, fine saws, and Hilti drills. Everything had a place. Everything served a purpose. I realized then that Julian Vane had made a fundamental error, the kind of error that leads to a catastrophic collapse. He assumed that because a man is quiet, he has nothing to say. He assumed that because a man works with his hands, he doesn't have a sting. He saw a blue-collar worker and saw a servant. He didn't see a predator who understood exactly how to dismantle a life. He thought I was a background character in the movie of his life. He didn't realize I was the architect of his ending. The morning inspection. The next morning was a master class in performance. Sarah was at the stove, frying eggs and whistling a tune. She looked radiant. Apparently, the adrenaline of a secret life works better than any high-end skincare routine. "You're off early today?" she asked, not looking back. Her voice was light, airy, the voice of a woman who thought she was untouchable. "Got to check the site on North Ridge," I said, stirring my coffee. The metal spoon clicking against the ceramic was the only sharp sound in the room. "The soil is tricky up there. If you don't watch the drainage, the whole foundation can shift before the roof is even on. It's a mess of clay and hidden water." Sarah laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, Elias. Always with the foundations. Can't you ever just enjoy a building without worrying about what's underneath it? Some people are building the future and you're still worried about the dirt." She walked over and kissed my cheek. She smelled of lavender soap and something else, something expensive and musky. Sandalwood. Julian Vane's signature scent. It was like a chemical burn on my skin. I looked at her, the woman I'd known since we were 19. Her beauty was still there, but to me it now looked like a bad paint job over rotted siding. I saw the crow's feet she tried to hide, the way she checked her phone every time I turned my head. "The thing about materials, Sarah," I said, sliding my chair back with a slow, deliberate screech against the tile, "is that they have to be honest. If a beam is hollow, no amount of gold leaf will keep it from snapping under pressure. And the pressure is coming. I can feel it in the air." Her smile flickered just for a millisecond. A tiny crack in the mask. "That's an odd thing to say over breakfast. You're being weirder than usual." "Just thinking about work," I replied, grabbing my keys. "It's going to be a long season." I didn't go to my job site. I drove to the county records office. Surveying the site. To destroy a man like Julian Vane, you don't use a sledgehammer. That's for amateurs. You use the law, his own ego, and the very ground he stands on. I spent the afternoon in the basement of the records office. Doris, the clerk, was a woman whose porch I'd fixed for free after her husband died. She let me in without a second thought, handed me a lukewarm coffee and pointed me toward the dusty archives. "Looking for something specific, Elias?" "Just checking the old soil surveys for the North Ridge, Doris. Thinking about buying a plot near the Vane project. Don't want to buy a sinkhole." I spent hours poring over maps from the 1970s, maps that predated the revised versions Julian's father had pushed through the zoning board 20 years ago. What I found was a gift from the universe. The North Ridge wasn't just tricky. It sat on a series of ancient limestone karst pockets. Sinkholes. The entire ridge was a honeycomb of subterranean voids. In the 80s, the town had designated it a non-buildable zone. But through a series of donations to the city council and re-evaluations by a corrupt engineering firm, the Vane family had cleared it for construction. Julian was building a 20-unit luxury complex on a geological ticking time bomb. "I'm a contractor. I know the cost. I'd seen the delivery trucks going up that hill." He was cutting corners on the pilings. He was using standard grade 40 rebar instead of the high-tensile, epoxy-coated stuff required for unstable terrain. He was gambling that the ground would hold long enough for him to sell the units, collect the commissions, and disappear into his next project before the first cracks appeared in the swimming pools. I photographed every page, every forged signature, every discrepancy between the 1978 survey and the 2024 Vane report. The silent observation. For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I watched Sarah get ready for her late shifts at the boutique. I watched her check her reflection 3 times before leaving, applying a lipstick she never wore for me. I watched the way her hand trembled slightly when she told me the inventory count was running late again. I didn't confront her. Not yet. A confrontation is an emotional outburst. I needed a structural failure. I needed her to watch the man she chose crumble into nothing. I began my own investigation into Julian's finances. Every day after work, I'd sit in my truck across from his office. I learned his routine. I learned that he was losing sleep. He was at his desk until midnight, the lights in his glass-walled office burning like a beacon of anxiety. He was over-leveraged. He had 3 different bank loans coming due, and the Heights was his only way out of a massive debt spiral. One afternoon, I followed him to a private meeting at the Oak Haven Country Club. I parked my muddy Ford between 2 Mercedes. I walked into the lobby wearing my work vest. The hostess looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance, as if I'd wandered into the wrong century. "I'm here to fix a leak in the men's lounge," I said. It wasn't a lie. I had noticed a dripping faucet there a month ago during a charity event. No one checks a man with a toolbox and a look of quiet competence. I walked past the dining room and saw Julian sitting with a man I recognized, Arthur Blackwood. Blackwood was the richest man in the county. Old money. He didn't like risk and he hated flashiness. If Julian lost Blackwood's investment, the project would collapse within 48 hours. Julian was leaning forward, his hands moving excitedly, sweat visible on his brow despite the air conditioning. He was selling the dream. Blackwood looked skeptical. "We've got the best engineers in the state, Arthur." Julian's voice drifted through the door as I lingered in the hallway. "The foundation is more stable than this club. We're ahead of schedule. By next spring, those units will be the most sought-after real estate in the South." I walked into the men's room, pulled out a small piece of copper pipe from my pocket, and dropped it into the drain of the sink nearest the lounge entrance. I turned the water on high. It backed up instantly. As Julian walked out of the meeting 10 minutes later, looking triumphant but exhausted, I was there. I was kneeled on the floor, surrounded by a puddle of dirty water, wrench in hand. "Hey, watch the shoes, you idiot!" Julian snapped, jumping back as a splash of water hit his polished loafers. "Sorry, Mr. Vane," I said, looking up. I made sure to look as simple as possible. I let a little bit of the grease monkey show through. The pipes in this town are old. They look good on the outside, shiny and expensive, but inside, they're just waiting to burst. All that pressure's got to go somewhere. Julian really looked at me for the first time. He didn't recognize me as the husband of the woman he was sleeping with. To him I was just the plumber, a utility, a tool. "Whatever," he muttered, wiping his shoe with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than my wrench. "Just get it fixed. Some of us have real work to do. High-stakes work. Not playing in the mud." "High-stakes work," I repeated softly to his retreating back. "I'll remember that, Julian. I'll remember every word." The first incision. I returned home late that evening, smelling of old paper, stagnant water, and the cold scent of revenge. Sarah was on the phone in the living room, but she hung up the moment she heard my heavy boots hit the porch. "Late night?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of suspicion. She was looking for a fight, for an accusation. She wanted me to be the dull husband so she could justify her betrayal. "Yeah. Ran into some guys at the hardware store," I lied. I'm a good liar because I don't do it often. I keep my lies like my tools, sharp and hidden until needed. They were talking about the Heights. Word is Vane's having some serious trouble with the investors. Something about a structural audit by the state. I saw the blood drain from her face. She was Julian's confidant. She knew his stress levels better than anyone. She probably knew his bank balance to the penny. "A structural audit?" she repeated, her voice cracking. But Julian said, I heard the project was doing great." "People say a lot of things when they're desperate, Sarah," I said, sitting down to take off my boots. I let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a man burdened by the world. "But you can't hide a bad foundation forever. If that project fails, Julian is finished. Personally liable. He'll lose the house, the cars, the name. He'll be lucky if he doesn't end up in a cell for fraud. That's the problem with men like him. They build on sand and act surprised when the tide comes in." I looked up at her, catching her eyes. She was staring at her phone as if it were a poisonous snake. "I actually feel bad for the guy," I added, my voice dripping with fake blue-collar sympathy. "He's got so much pride. Imagine him having to move into one of those cheap, moldy rentals by the tracks. He wouldn't last a week in the real world." That night, the house was silent, but the air was vibrating. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling I'd built, listening. Around midnight, the floorboards didn't creak, but I heard the faint snick of the bathroom door locking. Then, the sound of the shower running at full blast to drown out a voice. She was calling him. She was panicking. She was telling him that even this simple contractor was hearing rumors of his ruin. I smiled in the dark. I had planted the seed of paranoia. I had introduced the first microscopic crack into the bridge they were building together. I am a builder by trade. But as I closed my eyes, I realized I am a much better architect of ruin. Julian thought he was taking my wife. He didn't realize I was taking his entire existence. And I hadn't even picked up the sledgehammer yet. The thing about psychological demolition is that you don't need to plant explosives. You just need to introduce a resonance, a frequency that matches the hidden cracks already in the soul. For Julian Vane, that frequency was fear. Not the fear of death, but the fear of being ordinary, of being poor, of being the man who failed. By the second week of my project, the atmosphere in Oak Haven had shifted. I wasn't just a contractor anymore, I was a whisperer. A spent my mornings at the local diner, the kind of place where the air is thick with the smell of burnt coffee and diesel exhaust. I'd sit with the old-timers, the retired foremen who still kept their ears to the ground. Shame about the North Ridge, I'd say, casually sliding a blueprint across the laminate table. I was looking at the drainage specs. If they hit a heavy rain, that retention pond is going to blow. It'll wash out the main access road before the first tenant moves in. I didn't have to say more. By noon, the guys at the lumber yard were talking. By evening, the bank tellers were whispering. In a small town, a rumor from a man who knows how to build is more dangerous than a subpoena. I watched Julian's digital footprint like a hawk. His Instagram posts, once filled with champagne and hustle quotes, became erratic. He posted a photo of his office at 3 a.m. with the caption, "Winners don't sleep. They outwork the noise." I knew better. He wasn't outworking anything. He was drowning in his own shadow. The gaslight phase. At home, I played the part of the devoted, slightly dim-witted husband with surgical precision. I began improving the house in ways that were designed to drive Sarah to the edge. "I'm installing a new security system, Sarah," I said one evening, drilling a hole into the doorframe of our bedroom. "Heard there's been a string of break-ins. People targeting wealthy homes. Desperate people, you know?" I installed cameras. High-definition ones. I made sure to show her the app on my phone. "See? I can see everything from the job site. Even the driveway. It's for your safety, honey. With me working late, I don't want any unwanted guests stopping by." The look on her face was a masterpiece of suppressed terror. She knew Julian's Porsche was unmistakable. She knew that every time she thought about inviting him over, she'd be staring directly into a lens connected to my pocket. Then came the anonymous gifts. I knew Julian was a creature of habit. Every Tuesday he stopped at a specific dry cleaner to drop off his suits. I waited until he went inside, then I walked up to his silver Porsche, the one Sarah admired so much, and tucked a small handwritten note under the windshield wiper. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation. "The foundation is weeping, Julian. Grade 40 rebar won't hold the weight of a lie." I watched from my truck as he came out. He saw the note. He looked around frantically, his eyes darting across the parking lot. He didn't see me. I was just another guy in a beat-up Ford. He crumpled the paper, but his hands were shaking so hard he dropped his keys. He was starting to vibrate. The resonance was working. The social erosion. The following Friday, the annual Founders' Day dinner was held at the town hall. It was a black-tie optional affair where the town's elite pretended to care about the history of Oakhaven. Sarah was desperate to go. She wanted to see Julian in his element. She wanted to feel like she was part of the future of Oakhaven, not stuck with a man who had sawdust in his ears. "We should go, Elias," she said, smoothing out a dress that cost more than my last 3 tool upgrades. "It's important for your business. Networking." "Sure, Sarah," I said, putting on my one suit, a charcoal gray number that I'd tailored myself. "I'm good with a needle. It's just another form of joining materials. Let's go see the show." The hall was packed. Julian was there, of course, standing near the punch bowl, surrounded by local council members. He looked haggard. The tan was still there, but it looked like a mask. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was gripping his glass of scotch like a lifeline. Sarah immediately drifted toward him, though she tried to make it look accidental. I stayed back, blending into the wood-paneled walls. I watched them exchange a look, a desperate, furtive glance that told me everything I needed to know. They were scared. They were talking about the rumors. They were talking about me. I waited for the right moment. I saw Arthur Blackwood, the man Julian needed for his final funding, standing alone by the window. I walked up to him. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, nodding. "The porch on your summer house is holding up well, I hope? The cedar should be silvering nicely by now." Blackwood smiled. "You like me?" I'd saved his historical gazebo 3 years ago when the town council wanted to tear it down. "Elias, good to see you. It looks magnificent. Best craftsmanship in the county." "Appreciate that, sir. Speaking of craftsmanship." I lowered my voice just enough. "I've been hearing some chatter about the North Ridge. Some of the boys on the concrete crew are saying the slump tests are coming back soft. Real soft. Like building on oatmeal." Blackwood's expression went from warm to glacial in a second. "Is that so?" "Vane tells me the site is rock solid." "Vane is a developer, sir," I said with a humble shrug. "He sees the finish line. I'm a builder. I see the dirt. If it were my money, I'd ask for an independent core sample. Not the one Vane's firm provides. One from a guy with no skin in the game." I walked away before he could respond. I didn't need to sell it. I just needed to plant the doubt. 10 minutes later, I saw Blackwood pull Julian aside. The conversation was brief. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He looked toward the back of the room, his eyes finding mine. I raised my glass of water to him. A silent toast. The internal collapse. The car ride home with Sarah was a tomb. She was staring out the window, her breath fogging the glass. "You okay, Sarah?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm just tired, Elias," she snapped. "And Julian?" "Mr. Vane, he seemed very stressed. People are being so cruel to him. Spreading lies about his project." "Lies are like termites, Sarah," I said, turning onto our gravel driveway. "They only eat what's already dying. If his project is solid, a little talk won't hurt it. But if it's built on a lie, well, the weight of the truth is a heavy thing to carry." She didn't answer. She ran inside and locked herself in the bathroom. I didn't follow her. I went to the garage. I opened my laptop and logged into the security app. I hadn't just installed cameras for the driveway. I had installed a hidden microphone in the master bathroom, the only place she felt safe. I put on my headphones. "Julian, you have to do something." Sarah's voice was a frantic whisper, punctuated by the sound of running water. "Blackwood is asking for a new audit." He mentioned the soil. "Someone is talking, Jules. Someone knows." "I know." Julian's voice came through her phone, distorted and panicked. "I'm getting these notes, Sarah. Someone is stalking me. They know about the rebar. They know about us. If this audit happens, I'm ruined. I've already spent the deposit money. It's gone. I'm a dead man walking." "Is it Elias?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think he knows? That idiot?" Julian scoffed, but there was no conviction in it. "He can barely read a blueprint. No, it's someone else. An investor or a rival firm. But Sarah, if the bank pulls the loan, I'm leaving. I have to. I can't stay here and watch them take everything." "You'd leave me?" There was a silence on the other end. A long, cold silence. "I have to save myself, Sarah. You understand that, right?" I took off the headphones. My heart was a steady 60 beats per minute. I felt nothing but the satisfaction of a job well done. The structure of their affair was buckling. The golden boy was ready to discard his queen to save his own skin. And Sarah was finally realizing that she hadn't traded up. She had traded a solid foundation for a house made of smoke. The last support beam. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called the state building inspector's office. I didn't report a violation. I simply requested a consultation on behalf of a concerned citizen regarding the environmental impact of the North Ridge development on the local water table. I knew the lead inspector, a man named Henderson. He owed me a favor from back when I'd helped his daughter get her first house up to code. "Elias," Henderson said, "what's on your mind?" "Check the karst pockets on the North Ridge bill. And check the rebar receipts against the actual installation logs. I think someone's playing a shell game with the safety margins." "That's a heavy accusation, Elias." "I'm not accusing anyone, Bill. I'm just a guy who cares about his town. I'd hate to see a building slide down that hill onto the elementary school." "Wouldn't you?" There was a pause. "I'll be there Monday morning. With a full crew." I hung up. The stage was set. The gala was only 3 days away. Julian was planning to announce the final phase of The Heights and secure the last $5 million he needed to stay afloat. Sarah was planning to be there by his side, ready to leave me the moment the check cleared. They both thought they were heading toward a new life. They didn't realize they were walking into a controlled demolition. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, sharpening my chisels. The sound of the stone against the metal was a lullaby. Everything was according to plan. The cracks were wide enough now. All I needed was one final heavy blow to the center point. I looked at the picture of Sarah and me on the workbench from our wedding day. We looked so young, so honest. I touched the glass, then turned the photo face down. "Measure twice, Sarah," I whispered to the empty room. "Cut once." The final stage of any demolition isn't the explosion. It's the silence that follows. It's that split second when the gravity takes hold, and the structure realizes it can no longer support its own weight. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of unpolished pewter. I stood on my porch, watching the state inspector's fleet of white SUVs wind their way up the North Ridge. I could see them from my house, tiny white ants crawling over Julian's glass and steel dream. By noon, the cease and desist order would be taped to the main gate. Sarah was a nervous wreck. She spent the morning dropping things, a coffee mug, her car keys, her composure. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped like she'd been struck by a live wire. "Elias," she said, her voice thin and brittle as dry rot. I think I need to go into the boutique early today. There's a lot of prep for the gala tonight." "Of course, Sarah," I said, not looking up from the local newspaper. "Big night for the town. Big night for Julian Vane. You should look your best." I looked at her, then really looked at her. She was wearing a silk blouse I'd bought her for her birthday. She looked like a ghost in her own skin. "You okay?" I asked, my voice dripping with that calm blue-collar concern that had become my sharpest weapon. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," she snapped, grabbing her bag. "Just stress. Everyone is stressed." She fled. I watched her car peel out of the driveway. I knew where she was going. She was going to find Julian. She was going to try to salvage the sinking ship. What she didn't know was that I'd already pulled the plug from the hull. The Gala of Ghosts. The Oakhaven Country Club was transformed that evening. It was draped in gold and white, the colors of success, the colors of the life Julian Vane thought he deserved. Every major player in the county was there. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged bourbon, and the quiet, predatory scent of money looking for a home. I arrived late. I didn't wear a tuxedo. I wore my charcoal suit, my boots polished to a high shine, and my hands scrubbed clean of the day's grit. I didn't belong in this room, and I made sure everyone knew it. I wanted to be the anomaly, the glitch in the system. I saw Julian near the stage. He was sweating through his $5,000 tuxedo. His eyes were darting toward the entrance every time the door opened. He looked like a man waiting for an executioner. Sarah was near him, though not with him. She was hovering in his orbit, her eyes red-rimmed. She saw me walk in and nearly dropped her champagne flute. I didn't go to her. I went to the bar. I ordered a ginger ale and waited. At 9 p.m. Julian took the stage. He stood behind a podium embossed with the Vane Development crest. Next to him, covered in a velvet cloth, was the architectural model of the Heights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began. His voice was shaky, lacking the booming arrogance of a month ago. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a building. We celebrate the future of Oakhaven. The Heights represents the pinnacle of luxury, of safety, and of integrity." The word integrity hung in the air like a bad smell. I stood in the center of the room, my arms crossed. I was the only person not clapping. Julian's eyes found mine. I saw the flash of recognition, then the surge of pure, unadulterated fear. He knew. In that moment he finally realized that the grease monkey was the one who had been tightening the noose. "However," Julian continued, his voice cracking, "there have been some technical delays. Minor bureaucratic hurdles regarding the North Ridge site." "You mean the sinkholes, Julian?" My voice didn't need a microphone. It was the voice I used on job sites to be heard over the roar of a generator. Deep, resonant, and undeniable. The room went tomb silent. "Who said that?" Julian stammered, squinting into the spotlights. I stepped forward, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. I felt Sarah's gaze on me, a mix of horror and a sickening realization. "I did," I said, stopping 10 feet from the stage. "Elias Thorne. The guy who fixes your leaks. I'm just curious, Julian. Did you tell Mr. Blackwood and the council about the karst pockets? Or about the grade 40 rebar you substituted for the high-tensile steel in the foundation pilings?" A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Arthur Blackwood stood up from the front table, his face like a thundercloud. "What is this, Thorne?" Blackwood asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's a structural audit, Arthur," I said, reaching into my jacket. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution photos, the ones of the rusted, substandard rebar sitting on the Vane site, and the original 1970s geological surveys. I handed them to Blackwood. Julian here thought he could build a monument to his ego on a foundation of lies and soft clay. The state inspector shut the site down 4 hours ago. He's probably waiting at the office with a warrant as we speak. Julian lunged at the podium, his face purple with rage. "He's lying. He's a disgruntled employee. I've never worked for you, Julian," I interrupted, my voice turning icy. "I work for the truth of the build. And the truth is you're a fraud. You're broke, you're desperate, and you're about to be famous for all the wrong reasons." Julian looked at the crowd. He saw the judgment. He saw the money retracting like a tide. He looked at Sarah, silently pleading for a lifeline. I turned to her. Everyone followed my gaze. "And as for my wife," I said, my voice softening but carrying even further in the silence. "I think she has something to tell you, Julian. Or maybe she'll save it for the divorce proceedings." After all, she was the one who left her iPad synced to my account. She's the reason I started looking into your integrity in the first place. The gasp that went through the room was the sound of a social death sentence. In Oak Haven, a scandal is a stain that never washes out. Sarah looked like she wanted to die. She didn't cry, she just stood there, withered and exposed, realizing she had betrayed a man who knew how to dismantle the world for a man who couldn't even keep a secret. Julian didn't say another word. He turned and walked off the stage, nearly tripping over the velvet-covered model. As he passed me, I smelled it one last time, the sandalwood. It didn't smell like success anymore. It smelled like the scent they used to cover up the smell of a locker room. The aftermath. I didn't stay for the fallout. I walked out of the club into the cool night air. I sat in my truck and listened to the silence of the town. Within a week, Julian Vane was gone. He didn't wait for the trial. He took what was left of his liquid assets and disappeared, likely to some offshore bolt hole or a cheap motel in a city where no one knew his name. Vane Development went into receivership. The North Ridge site is now a fenced-off scar on the hillside, a monument to a man who thought he was bigger than the earth. Sarah moved out the next day. I didn't stop her. I didn't even speak to her. I just left a box of her things on the porch, the things I hadn't built. The clothes, the jewelry, the lies. I'm sitting on my porch now. The sun is setting, casting a warm, golden light over the oak trees. The house is quiet. It's a good kind of quiet. The kind you get after you've cleared out the dry rot and reinforced the beams. I took a sip of my beer and looked at my hands. They're still calloused. They're still stained with the work of the day. But they're steady. A neighbor drove by and waved. I waved back. People in Oak Haven don't talk over me anymore. They don't see a simple man. They see a man who understands that a life, just like a house, is only as good as the foundation you build it on. I have a new contract starting tomorrow. A local family wants a library built. They want it solid. They want it to last 100 years. I can do that. I know exactly how to make things stand. And I know exactly how to make them fall.